You've probably seen it on the internet. Someone basically insults you and saying that you can't complain about it because he's just exercising his First Amendment right to free speech, even if he doesn't live in America. A lot of people seem to misunderstand the freedom of speech and the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. I'll be talking about free speech in terms of America because that's where I live. Where you live, it's probably different. Actually, it's probably most definitely different. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution is the first one because it's the most important. It grants us the right to free speech, which is generally important to stopping oppressive regimes, and is often the first one that an oppressive regime will try to attack. Worded exactly as it is in the Constitution, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's more or less it. Let's talk about what that actually means, or what it's supposed to mean. See, here's the thing. Most of the amendments to the United States Constitution were written away to be interpreted to pretty much any time. Sometimes times that the people who wrote them couldn't have possibly imagined. And for that reason, you shouldn't be surprised when people do interpret them in less than ethical ways. The 14th Amendment was made after the American Civil War that more or less stated that people have equal protection under the law no matter their race, sex, or etc. Somehow we got the concept of corporate personhood out of this. In the United States, a corporation like Google has the exact same rights as any person. Actually, in some ways they have more rights, but that's a story for another day. This can be a problem when, a corporation can plead the fifth, but sometimes they have the potential to be interpreted for the positive. Like, despite not being written to the Constitution, people often claim their right to privacy on the 9th Amendment. The 9th Amendment states, "The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people." This means that people don't only have rights laid out in the other amendments. It's complicated. And you'd never believe some of the things protected by these amendments. For example, corporate lobbying, aka bribery in all but word, is protected under the First Amendment because the people can petition the government for a redress of grievances, and because corporations are legally people, they get that right in the United States. Some things, however, are not protected by the First Amendment. Let's start with the most misunderstood part of the amendment. Congress shall make no law. In the United States, your right to free speech is only defended from the law. For example, internet moderation or the business where you work telling you what you can or cannot say does not violate your right to free speech. It is censorship technically, yes, but not legally, and it is not a violation of your free speech. If you got blocked on an internet forum for saying something that got someone mad, that does not prevent you from going somewhere else and saying the exact same thing. If you get kicked out of every single website because of what you say, well then that's your problem. The right to free speech is not the right to an audience. Just because you can say whatever you want does not make anyone else obligated to listen to what you have to say. Also on that note, being criticized does not violate or even challenge your right to free speech. You're also not free from the consequences of what you say. No one is obligated to listen to you or like what you have to say, and they are allowed to exercise their opinion on the matter. There are limits on free speech, though. Despite the vague wording of each of the amendments in the Constitution, they're not as encompassing as they sound. For example, the Second Amendment gives me the right to bear arms. If we follow that law to the letter, then I should be able to buy a bazooka on impulse and walk into a crowded mall. I'm obviously not able to do that in any of the 50 states. For example, even under the freedom of speech, you can't say that your sugar pills will cure someone's diabetes. I mean, think about copyright law. According to the law, I should be able to use anyone's intellectual property however I want. So let's talk about lying. Slander and libel. Are they protected under free speech? Slander or libel? No. But lying in general? Depending on the context, it's yes, no, or maybe. In a case of slander or libel, the burden of proof is on the plaintiff. To get someone arrested for slander or libel, there is a malice standard. You have to prove that the publisher of the statement in question knew that the statement was false or acted in reckless disregard of its truth or falsity. Because people can't read minds, this is quite difficult to do. Although with the advent of the internet and forums and the degradation of privacy, it does get easier and easier. Why is the law written this way? It was decided in the civil rights movement. No one wanted to really do any reporting because they might have been held responsible for libel. The court noted that true statements may not be said if the law went the other way out of fear that anything they said could have later been proved to have been false. Don't take this as an invitation to go lying about people either. The law can be changed the other way too if it becomes problematic enough. But keep in mind, an all-encompassing freedom of speech does have its own set of problems. No news source in the United States is legally obligated to tell you the truth. They can tell you whatever the hell they want, and it's totally legal. I knew there was a conspiracy among the weather people. The freedom of speech versus the freedom to privacy. You may have already noticed that there's a conflict here. Due to an interpretation of the 9th Amendment, based on the 4th Amendment, the citizens of the United States have the right to privacy from the government. Facebook can do whatever they want with your information if you sign the terms of use. So we do have sort of the right of privacy, even though that's constantly being invaded. And we also have the right to free speech. So, is it protected under free speech to post someone else's personal private information? Not usually, no. You can sue someone if they publish private information that is not of legitimate concern. Its disclosure must also be highly offensive to a reasonable person. So yes, posting someone's home address and telling people to beat the shit out of them is illegal. And once again, the law is open to interpretation. For example, if you report that someone is homosexual and they actually are homosexual, several things could happen. If, say, that person was fired and harassed because of this fact that is not of legitimate concern, then yes, they do have the right to sue you for that. If the person is totally okay with it and they feel that they don't have to be secretive about it, then they're most likely not going to sue you. The best way to avoid getting sued, do not publish private information that no one should give a shit about. What would be a legitimate concern? I don't know, the location of someone planning to blow up a building? They have to be in immediate danger, is what I'm saying. Obscenity and hate speech. Welcome to the most controversial part of free speech. In this argument, there are extremists on both sides of both arguments. So, are hate speech and obscenity protected under the First Amendment? Once again, yes, no, maybe, I don't know, and it varies. Let's start with obscenity. If it were completely protected by free speech, anyone could put anything on television at any time, including child pornography. With obscenity enforced to the maximum, then the media would be subject to following the political and social trends of the time to the absolute. This could be a problem in, say, the civil rights era. The debate is finding a comfortable place between the two. And hate speech. By definition, hate speech is inflammatory statements made directly or indirectly towards a group based on said group's race, skin color, religion, beliefs, background, mental health, physical ability, social class, sexual orientation, gender, and so on, that may incite violence or encourage discrimination. So like before, there's a huge spectrum. Hate speech can be as simple as using an epitaph to describe someone's race in a negative way. It can be as advanced as picketing the funerals of homosexuals. On one side of the fence, people use claims of hate speech to stifle free speech. On the other side of the fence, people claim free speech to discriminate towards people. This is balanced with the fact that people do not have the right not to be offended. Just because someone is offensive, you do not have the right under the law to make it go away, even unpopular ideas. On the other hand, if you posted something offensive, you do not have the right not to be criticized. Can people be arrested for hate speech? In the United States, well, they can be arrested for a hate crime, and if you constantly post hate speech, any crime that you may commit may be construed to being a hate crime, even if there was no hate crime intentions, so... Protecting the freedom of speech. I think it's safe to say that a lot of the higher-ups don't really like free speech, whether it's a business that can't take criticism or a politician that wants to be a dictator. And yes, constitutional rights can be restricted in some way, shape, or form. What I'm saying is don't give these people the ammo that they need. You don't protect your Second Amendment rights by walking around public buildings with loaded guns. You harm the freedom of speech by, number 1, claiming censorship when there is none. The First Amendment only protects you from government censorship, and when people go around saying otherwise, it makes it harder to detect when some sneaky people actually try to violate the First Amendment. Demanding censorship. It works both ways. Slandering someone. You have the right of free speech. If by some quirk you have the right to lie about people, don't be surprised when people get angry enough to try to take away the latter and do damage to the former. Claiming malicious actions to be under free speech. If you do keep using hate speech, people within the group you're hating will be less inclined to defend the freedom of speech, especially if it leads to legitimate discrimination. There's a reason that, due to a recent poll, 33% of Americans think the freedom of speech goes too far. Obscenity for the sake of obscenity. Pretty much the same reason as above. It makes the freedom of speech less desirable, assuming that you have the right to an audience. So say if you've got a website so inflammatory and slanderous that no web provider wants to host it anymore, maybe you should realize that no one actually wants that speech around. Assuming that you have the protection from criticism. If you do an action purely to exercise your free speech rights, and get angry and defensive when people use their free speech against you, well, the best argument against something is a terrible one for it. And the people who do this are the worst arguments for free speech in the world. Posting people's private information. This should be more or less obvious. Like, don't do this, buddy. Yeah, you could do any of these under the right of free speech. If you want to keep it as you champion it, though, you won't. The more people who use hate speech, the more demand there is for hate speech legislation. You see what I'm saying? Freedom of speech is a powerful tool, and when stupid people use power tools, they often get hurt.